Welcome to Case Management and Documentation, Addiction Studies. Hi, my name is Shar Washington, and I'll be discussing this week's textbook readings with you. Chapter 7, Identifying Good Responses and Poor Responses. The process of communication. Communication is the sending and receiving of messages. But viewing communication in such a simplistic manner assumes that when we communicate, those who are receiving our messages understand its intent. But what happens when one individual sends a message to another individual? And upon receipt of that message, the person doesn't understand. Was there something wrong with the message? Or is there just something wrong with the receiver of the message? Typically, our first notion is to blame the receiver for not understanding our message and possibly overacting to it. In case management, our interactions and communications with clients are used as clinical and technical strategies to evaluate. For this reason, human service workers should have a deeper understanding of communication and how our responses, both good and bad, impact our clients. Continuous exchange. Communication is complicated. It's a dynamic process that involves both sending and receiving messages at the same time, which is ironic because growing up, I was always told if you're listening, you're not talking. And if you're talking, you're not listening. And while this may impact the understanding of a message when we interrupt a person or have overlapping messages, we still have the ability to communicate even while listening. This is because messages are also received by nonverbal cues and expressions. Nonverbal cues and expressions can also lead to misinterpretations, especially when the person has not verbally expressed themselves. Take, for instance, you are talking to your peer who's sitting across from you. You're using verbal expressions to tell them your excitement about getting an A on your midterm. You notice that their arms are folded and they aren't looking at you. Your peer is sending you a message without even talking. You may interpret this as they're upset with you, and they may be. But what if that's very far from the truth? Maybe they just received bad news. That's the complexity of communication. Verbal expressions in similar fashion can lead to misinterpretations. Let's take a look at two individuals having lunch together. During communication, the sender states to the receiver that their food smells delicious. The receiver replies back with thanks. However, the receiver has misinterpreted the message and believes that the sender wants to sample their food. Why do you think the receiver interpreted the sender's message as wanting to try their food? Feel free to pause the video to jot down a response. Honestly, there's no right answer here. And that's because the receiver's interpretation, just like our own, can be based on our background, cultural, culture, education, and life experiences. Even emotional states can impact communication. Taking it back to the example of you talking to your peer, based on their nonverbal expressions, you can tell that they are upset. And when replying to you, your peer says, "That's great," in a not so inviting or supportive tone. The peer's emotional state of being upset by the receipt of bad news causes you to believe that they may be angry with you or taking their anger out on you. Communication is tractional. The transactional model of communication states that communication between two or more individuals involve an exchange of messages that are influenced by both the receiver and the sender. Looking at this diagram, both individuals are deemed as the receiver and the sender. The noise refers to anything that may prevent the desired messages from being understood, whether it's internal, such as our bias, emotions, and even semantics, or external, such as loud noises. Each person is participating in the communication with their own field of experience. Adler, Rosen, and Proctor, authors of Interplay, The Process of Interpersonal Communication, compares communication to a dance. In successful communication, the intended messages are conveyed and understood by all parties involved. And just like in a great dance performance, everything moves in sync. However, when a message is conveyed by an individual and not understood, the feedback to the message could be confusing. This is when we have bad communication or miscommunication. And then the dance potentially turns into a chaotic freestyle. 12 roadblocks. The ongoing dialogue created during communication can have positive or negative outcomes, emphasizing the importance of careful message formulation and understanding. In human service, good communication is essential for positive outcomes for the client. Our understanding of what the client has expressed, as well as our responses, are essential in providing effective services. Poor responses can imply that the worker feels superior, which hinders trust and openness. Human service workers must recognize and avoid negative responses in order to foster constructive communication and rapport. Thomas Gordon has outlined 12 potential roadblocks or poor responses in communication. Although these 12 roadblocks were originally designed for parenting, the same principles can be adopted in human service work. As I go over these 12 roadblocks, remember that these statements are considered roadblocks when there is a problem or need. Some of these roadblocks may be harmless in our day-to-day communication with family or friends when there is a void of problems. Roadblock number one, ordering, directing, or commanding. This is the issuing of orders or command without any dialogue. Phrases that begin with you have to or you must without open discussion lack empathy. It's ignoring the client's experiences and or feelings. This can result in a client viewing the worker as an authority figure instead of a collaborator or support. It can be patronizing to the clients, making them feel like you're talking to a child, and it can harbor resentment as it pulls autonomy away from our clients. Roadblock number two, warning, admonishing, and threatening. This is the warning of consequences without discussing the client's inclinations. Phrases that begin with if you don't or you'd better may be used out of concern for our clients, but they don't address the client's problems. This results in clients believing that the worker does not accept them. Like ordering, it builds resentment and it creates adversarial conversations as the client may want to argue with you that they do indeed know what's best for them. Roadblock number three, exhorting, moralizing, and preaching. This is telling the clients what they should and ought to do. Phrases that begin with you should or you ought to make it seem like the worker has all of the answers and can communicate to the client that they aren't doing anything right. This results in the clients feeling pressure or guilt for not knowing or being able to do something. It shows that the worker lacks trust in their clients to handle their own situations and can come off as judgmental or criticism of how the client has been handling their situation. Roadblock number four, advising and giving solutions or suggestions. This is telling the client how to solve their problems. I know what you're thinking. As human service workers, shouldn't we be suggesting ideas or practical solutions to our clients for their problems? Absolutely. However, our clients should be actively participating in that discussion as well. We are collaborators. And when someone has shared their problem with us, phrases that begin with what I would do or you should do make it seem like that person is incapable of solving it themselves. This roadblock results in removing the autonomy from the client, even though that they're the one with the problems, dependency, When a case manager's goal is to guide the client through self determination and self sufficiency, and just like other roadblocks, resistance. Roadblock number 5. This is lecturing, teaching, and giving logical arguments. Trying to influence using facts, arguments, and logic. Now, if you're like me, I love a good fact, mostly because they are concrete. However, using facts or lecturing in our discussions with our clients don't encourage them to have real discussions. Phrases that begin with, here's the fact, or this doesn't make sense, pushes the conversation towards persuasiveness. This roadblock can result in defensiveness from the client, as people don't like to be proven wrong. Feelings of inadequacy or inferiority, as it may imply that the client doesn't really know or understand their situation and can learn a lot from the worker. The sixth roadblock is judging, criticizing, disagreeing, blaming. This is making a negative judgment or evaluation of clients. Phrases such as, you aren't thinking clearly, or you can only blame yourself, do not influence continuous positive discussion, nor does it provide safe spaces for the client to be open. The use of this roadblock has a higher chance than any of the other roadblocks to ensure that the client takes a defensive stance, as the responses are demeaning. Even more so, the client may resort to counter criticism, telling you a thing or two about yourself. The seventh roadblock is praising, agreeing, supporting. This is offering a positive judgment or evaluation or agreeing. As case managers, we should acknowledge and praise our clients for their accomplishments. However, praise should be used as encouragement. Statements such as, I couldn't agree more, or you're smart and can figure this out aren't always beneficial, especially when there's negative feelings surrounding a problem. Praise can result in shortened, meaningful discussions by either the case manager or the client. Sometimes workers even use praise to avoid hearing about the situation. Praise can also impact the client's willingness to share negatively, as the client may stop discussing their issues once they interpret you aren't understanding them. And consistent praise, especially when the person has different views on their situation, can come off as manipulation or criticism. The eighth roadblock is name calling, ridiculing, and shaming. This is making clients feel foolish. Out of all the roadblocks, this is the one that demonstrates a case manager is unprofessional. No matter how difficult a client may be, there's just no justification for name calling on the human service worker part. Statements such as, you act as if you didn't finish high school, or even a moron can figure that out, are never beneficial regardless of the context. These responses result in severe damage to the client professional relationship, as a loss of respect has occurred. It can be damaging to an individual's self image, especially if the client values your supportiveness. And much like other roadblocks, it can lead to resentment. The ninth roadblock is interpreting, analyzing, diagnosing. This is telling clients what their motives are, or analyzing their actions. Analyzing an individual can convince you that you have someone figured out. Using statements such as, your problem is, or you're just, lets us assume how the client is feeling or attempts to predict their behavior. Regardless if our analysis is correct or not, it can send the client the message that we are superior to them, and they lack self awareness. They may also feel embarrassed that their motives or actions are being exposed. And lastly, the client may begin to resist collaboration efforts in fear of a correct or incorrect diagnosis. The 10th roadblock is reassuring, sympathizing, consoling, supporting. This is trying to make people feel better or trying to talk them out of their feelings. As humans, we naturally try to comfort others who are in pain. But statements such as "don't worry" and even "I understand" can convey a message that we aren't really listening. This roadblock can result in us cutting off the client from having meaningful conversations. This could be due to us avoiding the emotions and pains in their experiences. It can also block true understanding. Although we may have similar experiences as our clients, we can't understand without accepting the need to hear their story. And even still, we may never fully understand. Even worse than saying "I understand" is adding a "but" to it. For instance, "I understand that that's painful, but you must do it." The "but" can feel like the worker is ignoring the client's feelings and has all of the solutions. The 11th roadblock is probing, questioning, interrogating. This is trying to have motive, reason, or cause. As case managers, when communicating with our clients, we may ask questions. And typically, these questions are to gain more insight or clarity of their situation. Sometimes, though, this can come off as interrogation. Statements such as, "Why did you do that?" or "Have you done this before?" sends a message that we are trying to force answers even before our client is ready. This can result in the client's feelings not being understood. Typically, probing is viewed as a technique to not hear all of the details or feelings. It can convey the idea that the case manager just wants the straight facts to take control of the problem. And it modifies or limits the safety in the discussion, as the client may no longer be comfortable in sharing their experience. The 12th roadblock is withdrawing, distracting, humoring, or diverting. This is trying to get clients to focus on something other than the problem. Statements such as "just forget about it" or "you think you got problems" are dismissive to the client's needs. Some workers may even do this as a way to not deal with the client or their problems due to their own needs. These responses can result in a lack of respect. The client may feel that you aren't trying your best as they recognize you aren't hearing them out. This damages collaboration as the communication becomes non essential to the client's needs. And lastly, the client may end up feeling ignored and helpless, as nothing productive can start if the human service worker and the client can't fully address it. Now that we've reviewed potential roadblocks in our communication, I want to discuss some pretty useful responses that can promote positive collaboration with our clients. Although many of us are already effective communicators in our personal relationships, our professional relationships can always be enhanced by four different techniques. This includes exploring responses that have impacts on our clients, identifying useful categories for constructing effective answers in communication exercises, practicing useful responses until they become automatic, and remembering that as professionals, it's our duty to create safe spaces for our clients to be open. And therefore, a continuous practice of thoughtful responses becomes a necessity. To create safe spaces for the clients, we must demonstrate that they can be vulnerable with us. Therefore, we must practice empathy. Listening and acknowledging are the first steps to this. Our next step will be to respond to what the client has just told us. In doing this, we want to avoid confusing the client by expressing our empathy with more than one feeling. If you were talking to a client who had just told you that they were a victim of a violent crime that happened when they were home, you might reply with, "You must have been so alone and scared." The client may have felt one, both, or even none of those feelings, and may be confused on which one to confirm. Using one feeling allows the case manager to directly assess and understand how the person may have felt. A better response may have been, "You must have been so scared." This narrows down the client's potential feelings and gives them a single option to confirm or clarify. Some openers to confirm the client's feelings while practicing empathy are: that must have made you feel, you must feel, and you must have felt. Sometimes we will need to respond to what the client has stated and not their feelings. This is the content of their conversation. This can be done by acknowledging the details of the communication in our response. Let's take, for example, we're having a discussion with the client and they are talking about their work schedule and their kids' schedule. They state that there's a conflict of making it to work on time and dropping their kids off at school too early, as then the kids don't get enough rest. They emphasize during the conversation they hate being late. We might respond by saying, "So, it's important to you that your kids have a good night rest." Or, "You're really concerned with being at work on time as you're a punctual person." Other common starters of these responses are, "So you were," or "he, she was," "right now you want," and "so in other words." There will be times within the discussions we have with clients require fact or single answers. This is what we call a closed question. Typically, a closed question starts off with the four W's: who, what, when, and where. For example, if we wanted to gain more insight into assisting a client with a housing crisis, we might ask, "Where do you live currently? Who do you live with?" These responses require answers with specific information. Open questions, however, encourage much more detail. They allow for meaningful and even emotional responses. Prompts to an open question may start off with, "Can you describe?" "Can you tell me a little bit about?" "Could you talk about?" or "Could you describe more about?" Because the nature of our communication is rooted in empathy, there will be a hint of concern regarding what the client is disclosing or the client's plans. How we respond to these concerns, as noted in the discussion of roadblocks, can lead to confrontation. The use of I messages reflect that the concern belongs to us and that we're willing to assist. I messages such as "I feel," "I think," "I need to understand" all indicate that the concern is not concrete or judgmental and leaves the door open for discussion. Nevertheless, there will be times where we will need to express and clarify what we want or need. And this may be even due to some form of interference by another individual. These responses will start off with firmer I messages, such as, "It would be helpful if," "I wonder if you could help us by," and even "could you." It invites the other person to be helpful with a more authoritative stance. Expressing to the client appreciation when they are sharing their thoughts, concerns, appreciation, feedback, or even criticism helps build stronger bonds by allowing honesty in the connection and may even inspire or reinforce their purpose. Some ways to start off appreciative responses are: "Thank you for bringing this up. It was good of you to tell me about this. I appreciate your thoughts about this. Thanks for telling me, and it's helpful for me to know this." When a client expresses anger, we may respond by arguing. However, this can hinder collaboration. The goal should be to disarm the anger at the start of rising emotions. The case manager should ask questions to understand the client's concerns. Questions such as, "How did I offend you? What did we do? And when did I or we do this?" can aid with gaining clarity. But please be aware, asking too many questions may feel patronizing or feel like an interrogation. It can influence the heightened emotions rather than de escalate them. Naturally, as humans, we may respond defensively when criticized. However, in a professional role, our defensiveness can impact trust and cause resentment. Human caseworkers should recognize that there may be some truth in our client's criticism. Some ways to respond to criticism are: I'm sure I could do better at times. We probably could do things a bit differently. There are people who have more experience than I have. It may be that we could actually do things differently. Use of these responses may actually diffuse adversarial interactions and promote understanding and intended resolution. There may be times when an angry client expects you to change or compromise. However, you're unable to do so due to regulations in your human service field, policies, or even the law. Essentially, your hands are tied. Some great responses to this may be to state, I understand your point. We're going to have to continue this way for now, but it was helpful to hear your concerns. Or, right now, we need to continue as we have, but bringing this up was helpful and I appreciate your suggestions. Both of these responses indicate that the client's feedback was heard and understood. It shows appreciation for their concern, but it also confers the message that no changes can be made at this time. If a solution or change to the client's criticism or suggestions is permittable, then that should be acknowledged as well. Some great responses to this may be to say, I think you have good ideas, and there's some ways we can solve these problems. Thanks for giving us some new ways to look at this. It was helpful. Both of these responses indicate that the client's feedback was considered and it shows appreciation for their efforts. In the last response to change being permittable, it was pointed out that the client's suggestion was helpful. That was the worker's feedback or view of the client's efforts rather than saying that's such a great idea, which praises the idea over the client's involvement. This type of useful feedback acknowledges traits or actions. Let's take it a bit further. Let's say the worker states, thanks for giving us some new ways of looking at this. I think this was really helpful. You demonstrated the need for creativity and was able to prioritize your schedule to fit your needs. That response highlights the client's strengths, such as creative thinking, and acknowledges the achievement of personal time management, things that the client can use in the future. Overall, identifying roadblocks and useful responses will assist in collaborating with the client. Collaboration is essential for client success. Even if we determine that the nature of our involvement will be minimum in resolving the client's issues. Responses that involve we convey support to our clients. This includes perhaps we can, maybe we can, and let's look at this together. Nonetheless, some clients will need a little bit more encouragement as they will start off not participating. This is when we can find ourselves telling the clients what to do or how to resolve their issues. Attempts to encourage the client may start off with I messages. And just to recap, these are messages that convey how we feel about the client's issues, that show concern, but not judgment. We can then finish the conversation with open questions such as, do you think? Or even comments such as, maybe you see differently. That invites the clients to share their perspective. Now, even with all of the communication techniques that have been discussed, communication problems are still bound to happen. These problems can be looked at in two categories: minor problems and major problems. One minor problem that we may run into is incorrectly assessing the client's feelings. This is when we misinterpret their message. Remember, Communication is an open dialogue between you and the client. Responding to feelings is meant to gain an understanding of the client's issues. The client may correct us and tell us exactly how they felt, which brings clarity to our misinterpretation and brings us back to the side of good communication. Another minor problem is inattentiveness. It is normal to not be able to give yourself or full attention to someone else 100% of the time. Remember, we are dealing with the client's feelings and our own experiences simultaneously. It's natural for our mind to wander off to our own thoughts. Maybe your child is sick or you got a flat tire. These thoughts can float around your mind consciously and subconsciously. To resolve the appearance that we're not paying attention and mitigate the impact, workers should practice body language that conveys interest. Let's talk about four major problems. The first major problem is when the worker is rushing to judgment, meaning they're only listening to the client to respond to them. And typically, it is about something they feel the client could have done better or something they did not like. As we discussed in the roadblocks section of judging, this can cause resentment and defensiveness, hindering communication. The second major problem is when case managers focus only on the content or details, preventing acknowledgement of the client's emotions. This type of communication lacks empathy and diminishes the possibility of collaboration. In similar fashion, major problem number three lacks empathy as well. This is when the worker offers solutions without acknowledging their client's feelings. Establishing meaningful connections means full consideration into the client's feelings. It creates a comfortable, safe, and inviting conversation and gives the client the authority to make their own decisions. Major problem number four is the need to get to the bottom of a problem and solve it. Some clients will be able to connect with us instantly without fear. However, other clients may require more time and more encouragement to do so. This is when effective communication is crucial. The worker must demonstrate patience or the patience to collaborate with the client and explore their experiences fully and empathetically.